Hi everyone, happy Friday. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to come back to the story To Kill a Mockingbird. I know we haven't read a lot of these chapters in a while, so what I would like for us to do is to just focus on the next two chapters, chapters 22 and 23, and kind of get back into the flow of reading so that we can work our way through the ending of the novel. So, what I want us to do as we read chapters 22 and 23 is to look at the reactions that a lot of the characters are having to the verdict of Tom Robinson's case. So, remember that Tom was found guilty of the crime against Mayella Ewell. And throughout these two chapters, we're not only going to see Scout, Jem, and Atticus discuss the events and the verdict, you're also going to have a lot of other characters express how they feel about it. And it really allows us to look deeper into a lot of the themes that we've discussed throughout the novel. So remember that we've talked about this idea of coming of age, of growing up, the idea of having knowledge or the importance of an education. So I want all of these things to kind of start to come back to us as we progress throughout chapters 22 and 23. At the end of chapter 23, hopefully you'll also be able to make a connection between these two, I guess we could say, uh, different plot lines in the novel, because for a while they haven't mentioned anything about Boo Radley, and he's definitely a very important character in the story. We've only been focusing now on Tom, but at the end of chapter 23, Boo Radley is going to be mentioned again, and it's going to help to tie in both Tom's story and Boo Radley's story. So, one of the things that I want to remind you of is this idea of innocence versus experience. In chapter 22 and the end of chapter 21, really, we see that the children react to the trial. So, while Scout is able to remain resilient, she's quiet about what happened, and she tries to hold a positive and innocent perspective after the trial. Jem, her older brother, is very idealistic, and his illusions about justice are broken after the verdict is revealed. In other words, Jem really believes that our system was going to find Tom Robinson innocent because there is evidence to prove his innocence. And unfortunately, when Jem hears the verdict, he just loses all hope in this justice system. That's a big deal because his father is a lawyer. His father is the one who's working within the system, and Jem looks up to his father. So at this point, we see that Jem is exposed to the harsh realities of adulthood and experience, something that Scout isn't quite there yet. However, this is why she's telling us the story, right? She has to learn something, and now she wants to tell us how that came about. So she's still in the process. Jem is a little bit ahead of her. So these are some of the themes. We saw prejudice so far in the story, especially with the jury's verdict in finding Tom guilty simply more or less because he is a black man and his word doesn't hold as much weight as that of a white man's. We also have courage as one of the themes, and this really is for Atticus. He defended Tom knowing that he was going to get a lot of backlash, and we'll talk about that today. And we'll also talk about how a lot of these things are tying into some of the current events for today. You also have the theme of racial intolerance, and obviously we see this in the jury when they hold Ewell's word over Tom's. The idea of tolerance and understanding, we have Atticus always wanting his children to tolerate other people, to have a better understanding of other people. This is prominent with his golden rule, and that'll come up again in these chapters. But we can see that social divide still exists. However, we're all human. How is that possible that people are treated differently if we're all the same? And then you have this theme of knowledge versus ignorance. And again, in the beginning, we saw Scout in the story try and begin to develop this when she wasn't allowed to read outside of school, and she holds on to that valuable time with her father. But this is just kind of going into this idea of growing up, right? As you grow up, you lose some of that ignorance and you gain knowledge, and you start to realize things about the real world, that things aren't always so black and white, that things aren't always as perfect as we would like. So these are the themes that we've covered so far, and we can see then how they're going to continue to develop when we look at the reactions of these characters in chapters 22 and 23. So this idea of empathy, again, I just spoke to you about it. Atticus, at different points in the novel, he advises his children to stand in other people's shoes. And in these chapters, he's going to tell Jem to see things from Bob Ewell's perspective. Now, that's a big, it's a loaded, I guess, statement from Atticus, because we know that Bob Ewell hasn't been acting fairly. And when Atticus tells his son, you should just try and see things from his perspective, he's really taking the high road and wanting his children to not judge people. But our job now is going to try and see if this works. If walking in Bob Ewell's shoes or trying to understand things from his perspective is going to help Atticus. And again, this idea of innocence versus experience, Jem and Scout are both entering the world of adult experience in these chapters. At the end, or closer to the end of chapter 23, you're going to read about a conversation that Jem has with his dad about the justice system, the judicial system. And in this conversation, it's going to reveal the harsh realities of human nature. In fact, one of those is that during that time, women were not allowed to take part in the jury system. So Scout is going to have her 2 cents into that, because she obviously doesn't think that's right. But the Cunninghams are also going to come into play. And if you remember, Scout got in trouble for making fun of Walter Cunningham in the beginning when he was invited to dinner after the first day of school. So this kind of brings me to hopefully some of the things that you've been keeping up with in our world, the real world, in our current events. So hopefully you've heard in the news about George Floyd's death, and all of the, I guess, outcry of the community, different parts of the country in regards to his death. And I just think it's really interesting, and one of the reasons why I love to teach literature, because although we're reading fiction, things around our world really contribute to these ideas. So I want us to think about the current events in our country, and if you haven't listened to what's been going on, George Floyd was, unfortunately, he lost his life while an officer was trying to arrest him. And the reasons why, I don't think we need to get into, but I do want to show you a clip, especially because of the backlash that has been occurring as time goes on and people learn about what happened. So take a look at this video, and then I'll bring you guys back to some of the things that I want to point out and how that relates to these 2 chapters that we're going to get into.